Hmm.
So, where were you born?
In Berlin.
In Berlin, and who were your parents?
Oh, my parents were Berliners, which isn't so, my grandparents were Berliners too. My father was an engineer for aeroplane engines, but he was not army or anything like that. He was in a private industry. Argus was a big manufacturer of aeroplane engines, and he was supposedly very, very good at that. And he used to fly himself, and as a child, I remember going to a lot of airfields. I remember when I had, what do you call that cough? Whooping cough. They took me up. He took me up in a small plane, open plane. I was terrified. I must have been six, but I remember that going up in an aeroplane because they say that whooping cough, if you can cure it in those days, I guess drugs weren't that sophisticated or well known. They took me up in the airplane, and I think it subsided. But these are the things that sort of come back.
Hmm.
And
What was it like being a kid in Berlin in the would have
oh,
been
it
the
was.
1920s or 30s,
I
early
was
30s?
born in 28, and I only have wonderful memories. It was
Mm.
great. I do remember, though, having to join the Nazi youth, the Jugendmädchen, or whatever it was called. When you were 10, you were supposed to, and you had to. I remember, I don't know whether my parents uh, wanted to avoid me to. No, I think it was just very normal, school. And when I entered the,
Well, what sort of stuff would you do in the young
well,
midget?
you had to go and you wore the uniform, with the knot and tie, and you had to learn the history of the Nazi Party.
Hmm.
But I think the main thing was also sports, how important physical activities were, marching and things like that. And comradeship was a big thing. You were taught to share, I think. I don't remember that much of it, but I certainly went to it every week. I think you had two,
Hmm.
3, 4 hours.
As a young girl at that point, like, did you get a chance to? Did they allow you to mix with the boys? Did you have a boyfriend in your
No, in
teens or
those
anything?
days you didn't have boyfriends. Yes, but
Yeah.
you could have had. But in those days it wasn't done this way.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, no, there was nothing like that.
Huh.
That only started when you were 17,
Oh, yeah.
18.
Okay.
But no, we were very. The school was a camp in the countryside and near Moscow. Actually, very pretty.
Did you ever see Hitler live?
Yes, I saw him. I remember being on my father's shoulder sometime. That must have been when I was 4 or 5. And I saw Hitler in a big black Mercedes. I don't know when that was. On on probably the Siegesallee, the main alley where he used to be.
So, what brought you to Dresden?
The school had some things there. We went on a trip, a school trip, and we were there when the attack, whenever it was, I should remember the day, and it was all mainly. I remember the river, the Elbe, being aflame, and people in there, and the people that would raise arms or something, it would start the phosphor. They were okay when they were in the water until the minute they raised their arms. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. And it took us, well, we were there after the attack, and we only got out in the afternoon, and they took us back.
How close was your view? Like, were you outside of the city and kind of looking in, or were you
No, I was right there,
right in the city?
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's horrible, horrible sound, bombs, you know. I mean, you hear them coming, and the explosions. And we stayed in a school facility,
Was there a bunker that you got
fairly,
down?
yes, bunkers, and fairly close downtown. I remember it was close to the Opera House. And when we came out, when the attack was over and we were free to get out, that's when everything was aflame. And I remember these screaming people, you know, that had jumped because of them being aflame into the river. And
Did they try to get, because you would be kind of almost like a paramilitary unit, did they try to get you girls to help with
well,
things? Or?
they got us another bus or something, and they took us out as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But it was an I remember these screaming people and the arms coming out of the water and starting to flame again because I couldn't understand. And then when you heard it was a phosphor bombing attack, I don't know how many people died in Dresden, but it must have been quite enormous. But they got us out,
Tens of thousands.
and we that was still when I was in camp in Moscow, in the school camp.
Had you experienced any other bombing raids?
Well, yes, our department was destroyed the first is two times. Once through phosphor bombs, and that was, you know, the flames, the bombs hit sort of on the second floor, and we were able to get some things out, and but the second time it was not possible. There was a bomb hit the next building, actually, next apartment building, and they were close together, and ours was destroyed pretty well. But the basements were very well fortified. You know, we don't know whether it must have been right after the war started. They started to put the ceilings and beams and now, after that night when everybody screamed and everybody knew that people were being murdered or raped, and you saw all the people being carried to the hospitals or something, I remember that. And my father said, "I'll take you to the bunker." And the other girl, her mother, my mother, and I were going towards the bunker, which was a big building, but it had never been destroyed. And as we arrived, it must have been at 8:30 in the morning, the doors opened, and I'll never forget it. Out came a mass of bloody figures. The Russians had gone in at night, raped and slaughtered, and it was awful. I mean, the Russians were drunk. Everybody was drunk for a week. They found all the liquor, of course, and it was horrible for a week, and we couldn't. And when we went back into the apartments, we had a big balcony. I was not allowed to look over the balcony. Only I was sitting on the bottom. You know, there was a flower box, and I could only look through the flowers, and you would hear. And it was May, and it was a hot May, and you heard wagons pulled by horses. You know, you heard the clatter of the horses' hoofs and that horrible smell. And you looked, and there were bodies, you know, like on the open platform of these wagons, just tied on. They were hands and legs and everything. There were bodies about 10 bodies high, you know. The access to the cemetery was at the end of that alley. So they would come. It was awful. But also then that's when people started to look, people tried to go into the inner city to find their families and so on. And everything was destroyed. So my mother, I remember my father went by bicycle, and then you had to be careful because the Russians stole all the bicycles, and the bridges were destroyed in Berlin. And Berlin has many rivers, and it's everything, you know, you near the house, Freibrücke, a big bridge, and there were only the metal frames left, and people had to. I remember my first trip going into a little more into Berlin and having to balance over the things. And but once the Berlin was declared an international city, that order was restored pretty quickly. We were in the British sector. I remember coming out of school, and all of a sudden in front of the school there was a lorry in those days, you know, with British soldiers giving out chocolates and so on. And I remember trading my wristwatch for a piece of Lifebuoy soap, Cadbury chocolate, and something else. My mother was angry when I got home. I was so happy to take some soap and chocolate home, and she didn't like it at all, because that's when this trading started. Everybody had been bombed 2 or 3 times, but you still had things, and people started to dig out things to go, because food was very short. There were ration cards, but everything was pretty different. And the people in the countryside, they started to make money. And I remember my mother taking a carpet once to outside Berlin. It's very agricultural, and she came back with a sack full of potatoes and some sugar. I mean, it was a tough time. Sachs, who used to be the biggest miner and one of the richest people, and his wife there, and I met all kinds. And I met my first husband there, Sandy Bass. I met good people in the library, you know. It was nice, and the people working there were very. It was nice. A nice environment. I worked there for 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. And then I worked for Pierre Burton. Remember Pierre Burton?
Mm-hmm.
He hired me as a researcher. That was not too well. It was Elsa Maxwell or Elsa something. She was his right-hand person. And I didn't have an easy time. I stayed with them for about a year. But it was not the best.
You about meeting your first husband?
Sandy?
Yeah. About how did you meet him, and then
He came to the library with a member. He was the youngest member of parliament under Diefenbaker. He was very young. He was 2 years younger than I was. He was a member of parliament under Diefenbaker. And Fred Stinson was a member of parliament. And Fred Stinson was a client at the university library. And one night he came in to bring back his books. He'd come back from Ottawa, and Sandy was with him. And he became very attached, and he would. Then Diefenbaker was out, and then Sandy opened an office as an agricultural consultant. He worked for Webster, who owned the Globe and Mail. Howard Webster was a big name then, and we started a farm for him in Prince Edward Island and so on. And when I left the library, I worked with Sandy in his office, and that's how the agricultural thing started to not just make sense to me. I enjoyed it very much. I learned a lot from him, and we divorced after 7 years. It was very horrible. I behaved very badly. It was one of the worst things, and I don't think I behaved very well. But
Why do you say that? Like,
well, I was not decent. I was an angry woman. I was not nice.
yeah.
And
So you just got a really good divorce settlement? Is that what you're
no,
saying? Or?
not settlement.
Yeah.
He had no money. I mean, wonderful family and all that, but we had no money. We had a house in Tranby, and I got half of that, and I sold it and all that sort of thing. But I started to work again in a library, in a mining library on Bay Street, and that's when, a year or two later, Baumann Massie called me because somebody told him I knew something about agriculture. The whole thing developed from then. And then my life changed totally because moving to Guelph was a wonderful thing. I really enjoyed it. Canadian agriculture was interesting, and the importation of cattle via France, it was an exciting side. For Canada, I think they established themselves on the scene as bringing in cattle from Europe, where they deposited the cattle to establish health status and so on, was outside Montreal in Quebec. And it was an interesting time. It was an interesting time.
Who were the people that you were interacting with? Was that the point that you were dealing with Marshall McLuhan when you were with Sandy Best, or like just the kind of the historic Toronto figures? Like,
to meet at there was a painter, York Wilson, a Canadian painter. We used to meet at his house a lot, and I was very interested. My husband was the first president of the opera company, the Canadian Opera Company, and so he helped. Well, he established it. Not that he was that interested in opera, but I became quite interested in the arts. Who was the gallery? The the AGO. I was quite involved with. Ignatieff, when he was a young man, he used to come to the farm with his aunt, Helen Ignatieff, and another aunt was married to a Belgian composer living on Woodlawn Avenue. I mean, we had interesting people, always interesting people. I think I wasn't out to find them, but I was lucky to always being at places or groupings or gatherings where there were interesting people, and for some reason we clicked well.
did you have any relation to Pierre Elliott Trudeau?
I had met Pierre Trudeau in Montreal uh, in, oh, that must have been, he was not prime minister. He had a girlfriend, her name was Elaine Bedard. She was a model. And Chatelaine, she was a model. And he had, or she had an apartment, or Courtenay, corner of Ridgewood. I remember the first building or something like that. And we used to meet there. I used to see him. Everybody was, he was a young man, very fabulous.
So what period would that be? Would that be in the 50s?
That must have been the year before he became Prime Minister. When was that? In the 70s, early 70s. And I
thought it was late 60s. I thought it was the late 60s that he became.
Possibly late 60s. But I remember Maclean's mentioned this, and I was very upset because in one of the years later, I was already in Montreal. Maclean's came out and mentioned some people who'd known Trudeau, and it was sort of suggested even that I may have had some personal, I mean...
Oh, really? That you might have dated him too?
And I got very angry, and I and then somebody said, I don't know what it was. There was an article of Trudeau and the people around it, and I was named in one of those, and I was very upset about it because I certainly... but I was impressed. He was an interesting young man and colorful, and he invited us to his mother's house in Outremont. I remember a big, old, very Canadian house with beautiful furniture in Outremont near Pine Avenue. It was a big brick house on the hill in Outremont. I met his mother, and I think he had a sister or something like that. I can't remember. Yeah, I met a lot of interesting people.
Didn't you do something with Mulroney?
Oh, yes, I went with my... Well, I went to Germany when they came to Berlin. I went with Mulroney and Mila. And I went after the fall of the wall. I did a study on the possibilities trade-wise with East Germany for John Cosby, who was then Minister of Trade, and I went to Berlin after the fall of the wall, and I think the Easter after the wall, the Cosbys came to stay a week in Berlin with me. Basic philosophy, the basic ground rules in Cuba are pretty good. They're not making the people live well. I mean, living well, and I mean, they have nothing physically. They have nothing, but there's something there we all have lost, or we never had. They have a lot of teachings that I hope will be remembered when all is over and the people are starting to go there and imposing all kinds of things on them. They have something special which appeals to me, and I think appeals to a lot of people. But you have to think how to feed people and how to have people live a decent life, and you don't have that. I opened the door, and there was Fidel sitting in my little chair in front of the window. I never forget, he had these little boots, his leg, and he got up and he said in perfect English, I hear you don't believe I exist. Here I am. And he pushed me, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed. And my bed, it was very disorganized with all my open suitcases, and it was full of packages and flowers. And he sat across from me, like from here to here, closer. And there were some people with him, translators and all that. The room was full of people. And he said, tell me. And we saw. I was, of course, I was terribly impressed, but he was interesting, and he really wanted to know. He seemed to know everything about cattle, and asked me about what my husband was doing or something, and I said he's a conservative. How can anybody vote conservative anymore? How can any thinking person? I said I'm a conservative. He said no, you definitely are not, and they know what your name. So I was utterly impressed with him, but you can't but be impressed with him. He was very well informed and cattle breeding and
So any kind of reflections on life? Like you've lived a
on
long
life.
time. Yeah, what's your philosophy of life now? After all these, you've had a very varied life, and what are your thoughts on it? It's a philosophical
I think
question.
I think it's a spectacular adventure, no? Life is. And I think you have to be totally open to it and totally. I'm not as free as I think I should be. I am now freer probably because everything is gone. Everything. I think I'm a much freer person now. I think possibly I used to be a little too impressed with people too, and probably impressed with names or positions. Not that yeah, I think so. It impressed me, and today I wish I had. I don't think I could have done differently than I have, but I wish I would have managed my life better. Managed it better, and but I've been especially lucky, I think, and I'm grateful for it, for the friends. I've always, I didn't set out to make friends, but I made friends and easily, and I have not paid too much attention or hung on too tightly, but it all comes back and they're all still there, and it's quite wonderful. And I think some of the things I did nothing to be proud of, but there are some things I should have I should have done better. I had some good ideas and started things and didn't do them too well. I'm not an organized person. I'm not an organized person. I am. I have ideas and I connect with people easily and well, and I can always find people and get things going